So here's a question that feels simple on the surface, but the more you think about it, the deeper it gets. The superhero movies need to be realistic or fantastical. And I don't mean just in terms of how many buildings fall over in the final battle, or whether the villain's plan actually makes sense. I mean, what direction should superhero movies lean into to truly work? What are we expecting from these superhero stories today? And what happens when we tip the scale too far in one direction? This isn't just a debate about capes and cows, it's about storytelling, about how we as audiences connect to myths in the modern age, whether we crave grounded truth or wackiness. So when people say they want a realistic superhero movie, they don't usually mean that Superman should pay taxes or how Batman fuels his Batmobile. What they're asking for is a sense of grounding, a story rooted in logic, consequence, and emotional honesty, where characters behave like actual human beings with real problems, stakes that actually matter, and where power doesn't magically erase accountability. Take Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy for example. Often held as the gold standard of realism in superhero cinema, and for good reason. It stripped away most of the camp that came with Batman, but kept the gadgets mostly, and focused heavily on Bruce Wayne's psychological trauma. But the real strength of those films wasn't just the gritty tone, it was that they took superhero ideas and applied them to real-world problems. Corruption, fear, chaos, justice. The Joker wasn't just scary because he had superpowers, he was scary because he felt like he could actually exist. And that is actually really scary. Realism in this context is about creating a world where the consequences of power are felt deeply, where a city feels like a character, where the line between good and evil is just blurry enough to reflect the real world. And that's why it always fits Batman, because compared to every other superhero out there, Batman is still one superhero that could actually exist and no one would be really surprised. All you need is a rich guy with muscles, probably takes steroids and knows martial arts with a touch of madness, and I don't know about you, but that person could be Batman. That's why Batman stories can be tackled with so much realism and no one would really complain, cause it makes sense. But here's the thing. We also go to the movies to escape, to dream, to believe in something bigger than the world we're stuck in. That's where the fantastical comes in. Fantastical superhero movies embrace the weird, the impossible, the mythic. They say yes, there is a talking raccoon, but hear us out, it works. These stories give us color, absurdity, imagination, and they can still pack emotional weight. Think about, let me say, the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. It's animated, wild, full of multiverse chaos, and I'm sure most people throw it off cause to their all-knowing brain it's just a cartoon. But those of us who actually just want to have a good time know it is. And we also know it's one of the most emotionally resonant superhero films ever made. It tells a story that you don't need to fully try to integrate into the world, but it can be interpreted based on how the audience view that message in themselves. Fantastical doesn't mean stupid. It doesn't mean there are no rules. It means the rules are eternal, consistent, believable within the world. These movies pull from the roots of comic book storytelling, where metaphor and spectacle go hand in hand. Long story short, some things don't make sense when it comes to comic books. Fantastical is where a battle between gods and monsters can still be a story about family, grief, identity, or legacy. When done well, fantastical superhero films become modern mythology. They take ideas from old legends and make them loud, colorful, and cinematic. You don't watch Thor Ragnarok for hard realism, you watch it for the Shakespearean family drama and the crazy things that happen. All of it still hold a story about legacy and inheritance, acceptance, etc. But when being fantastical is all flash and no heart, when it forgets that we need to feel something real beneath all the visuals, that's when the fantastical falls flat. Which takes me to Thor Love and Thunder, and without going too deep about it, it was a good movie. However, it didn't do much for fans. It played around with the serious themes that were in this movie that needed to be kept serious, cause Thor is actually one of the most tragic characters in the MCU, but Marvel keeps throwing jokes in his way, which at this point just doesn't make any sense. And the same problem with fantastical superhero movies can also be applied to realism as well. Because realism can also be overdone. There's a version of gritty realism that starts to feel too self-important, where the movie is desperate to prove it's not just a superhero story, and in doing so, it forgets to be fun. It forgets the point of the genre, forgets the point of the character. Sometimes in trying to strip away the silliness, you strip away the soul, and superhero movies at their core are supposed to be larger than life. They're not crime dramas, they are morality plays in spandex. So when realism loses the magic, when it trades wonder for bleakness, you get movies that feels like they are ashamed of where they came from. That's not progress, that's just general denial. And the prime example to me is Man of Steel. I liked this movie when it came out. I enjoyed the realism. It made some things I questioned about Superman make sense. But at its core, is that really good? Because in retrospect, Superman isn't supposed to make sense. Some things are just better left as questions. Superman stands for something. He represents something. And that thing is being hope, being justice. Yes, it sounds dumb and goofy seeing the world we live in, but it's what Superman is about. Telling that kind of story is what makes Superman such an inspiring character. Yes, it's good to ground some aspects of Superman or tackle some very realistic themes, but when it's taken to a point where you have to change who the character is to present it, that's where the problem comes in. People watch movies of their favorite superhero characters because they want to see how their stories can be intertwined with the real world and how they react to it being the character they represent in their comics, not how they would react if they were us. So after all this, is there a middle ground? Somewhere between realism and fantastical, is there a neutral ground where both of these ideals can be utilized without one side being too extreme? Yes, because the best superhero movies, they are not just realistic or just fantastical, they find a way to do both. And the prime example for me would be Iron Man 2008. This movie grounded a genius billionaire superhero in tech and PTSD, but it didn't shy away from the charisma of flashy suit-ups or Logan, which gave us a broader grounded take on Wolverine, but yet it never forgot it was telling a story about mutants and legacy. Even Black Panther created a fictional country with sci-fi technology but used it to have a real conversation about identity and responsibility. Even the Guardians of the Galaxy, being as goofy as it is, also strikes that balance and tells a good compelling story whilst being goofy. Or my personal favorite being the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, which is by far still one of the greatest superhero films of all time, that has touched so many generations of Spider-Man fans. This movie wasn't shy from the fantastical of Spider-Man. They even went as far as to give him organic webbing. Yes, it's kinda disgusting and makes no sense. It also proves they weren't afraid to dream, cause the mechanical could have somehow grounded Spider-Man in a way. But despite that, they still told a brilliant story of a young man struggling with being a hero, trying to do better, being responsible, having challenges, questioning his powers, and then accepting it. Whether he's accepted by society or not, he will do what he has to do cause it's the right thing and cause he can. You know what, I'll actually make a video about this when I have time because there's so much to unpack about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man that just can't be covered in this video. But I think you understand where I'm coming from. As for a good superhero film, there shouldn't be an extreme, but a middle ground. If a character chooses to put on his underwear on the outside, yes, it's goofy, but it doesn't take away from the story. If it means something, then it should mean something and shouldn't be ashamed of that. If a character chooses to do good despite how unrealistic it is because of our humanistic flaws, let him, cause that's what the character represents and that's the message being told. All these movies thrive when they respect both sides of the coin. They lean into the fantastical but anchor it in emotional truth. They let you dream and think and at the same time learn. But above all, it also boils down to what the audience actually want. Because audiences are way smarter now, maybe due to the internet or just more exposure to pop culture or Twitter. People understand a lot more and can also voice their own opinions on things as well. We don't need everything explained, we don't need things to be realistic for the sake of being mature, and we don't need fantasy that insults our intelligence. What we want is coherence, consistency, tone that fits the story being told. If you're gonna be grounded, commit to the emotional core. If you're gonna be wild, make the ride worth it, but still make it mean something. The real question isn't should superhero movies be realistic or fantastical. The real question is what serves the story best. Because at the end of the day, superhero stories are about ideals. They're about what we could be if we were better, stronger, braver. Whether you're watching a man in a metal suit fight terrorists or a demigod wrestle with prophecy, it's about how we relate to the extraordinary that makes the story told good. So the superhero movies need to be realistic or fantastical? The best answer is yes. They need to be real enough that we care and fantastical enough that we believe. That balance, that's where the magic is. But you don't always have to agree with me. Let me know which you think works best in superhero films, realism or fantastical, down in the comments. And while you're down there, you could also like this video and subscribe to support the channel and also help it grow and so that you don't miss any future uploads. But that's it for me on this one. Until next time, I'm out.